Welcome to another Ginger Prince production video. This video is a video response to Epydemic2020, who is a Christian video poster. He put a sort of generic answer to my God is a Consequentialist video, and I'm just replying to his reply to my video. My video, God is a Consequentialist, states quite a few things. It says that even if there is objective morality grounded in God, so if God is the foundation of morality that sort of decides what's good and bad, has an intrinsic value to an action, the evidence from the Bible and from anything that God has done, so from giving the flood, the global flood that killed everyone but 8 and all the animals and everything like that, that's an intrinsically, one would assume, an intrinsically bad action, but it's justified by the ends. So there was greater good, one must argue if you're a Christian, there's a greater good to come out of that evil. The sacrifice of Jesus is not a good thing, but a greater good comes out of it. All the deaths in the Bible that God causes or inflicts, a greater good must come out of them. So in effect, even though either you argue that there is no such thing as objectively good or bad actions, that everything is judged by the consequences, or you argue that even if things are good or bad intrinsically, that value gets trumped utterly by the consequences. So the consequentialist aspect to God's actions, to his morality, is more important and trumps the intrinsic objective value. And this seems to be completely and utterly borne out by the evidence from the Bible. So what does Epydemic2020 say to this? Well, nothing exactly. He's not addressing the points head on. As I say, it's a generic video, but let's look at what he says about morality. What Epydemic2020 does is look at the issue mathematically. So he takes a sort of control situation whereby do you murder one person in order to save one person? Because the cost of that is one person and the benefit of that is one person, then it is morally neutral. Is that a fine thing to do? So you murder someone, one, take away one, which is 0, so you just have, is the murder just morally neutral? Because the outcome is neutral. What he fails to do, unfortunately, is look at you can't take an action out of context. You literally, it would make no sense, because when we're defining that murder is good or bad, you're actually secretly smuggling in consequences the whole time. So the fact that I'm murdering someone isn't just a murder to save one person. It's, well, what example am I setting to other people by murdering someone? Is this a positive role model I'm acting in? Is this the society that I want? Will there be later repercussions with the fact that you can murder people for a neutral gain? And what kind of society will this produce? And these are smuggled in. These are things that you won't necessarily consciously be thinking about, but they are calculations that go on, I would posit, even if they happen subconsciously. So I think it's unrealistic, and this is a problem. And you often get people that in philosophy who will decry the use of thought experiments, because you are actually taking things wholly out of context into an unrealistic situation. And this kind of normative ethics, well, it's not normative ethics because it's not in a real context. So I would say that the control kind of experiment that Epydemic2020 is trying to illustrate is not in fact morally neutral, and I think just the nature of murder has consequences beyond the consequence of just one death. So let's look at the virtues of the person that commits a morally neutral murder. One would assume that they don't actually hold the desired virtues that a human we would think a human would want to hold, such as compassion and fairness. This person has committed a murder, killed someone else, in order to save someone. Now, completely out of context, we don't know what the reason for saving that other person is. We don't know all these other things. You see it as a flat, uncontextualized sort of murder. Then this person, would assume, would not have much compassion because they are actively killing this person. And in fact, in that way, I wouldn't argue that the murder is morally neutral, because you are going out of your way to kill someone, to save someone, rather than just letting that original person die. So it's a positive act rather than a passive act. And I think, therefore, it's slightly unfair to see it as a morally neutral act. I don't think it is just a murder. I think it has, it will have more internal consequences than you might imagine, based on the consequences of you murdering, so going out of your way to murder someone, rather than let nature take its course, as would be inferred by the original person just dying. Another objection is the fact that the word murder is not morally neutral. It has a lot of baggage, and to use it in this argument, we have to get away from the linguistic baggage that it holds, and that's a really very difficult thing to do. So just a slight warning that the word murder is a difficult word to use in what's attempting to be a very neutral argument. There is another issue with the use of murder being morally neutral. The method in determining which category a given claim falls into can be determined deductively. For instance, if murder is morally neutral and carries the same weight as, say, the claim that chocolate is delicious, nothing more than a sort of personal preference, then that means that one cannot morally impose that belief on others because it is a neutral. But murder, by definition, is imposing one's belief on someone else, so it's self-contradictory. When running through the gambit of possible moral rules, one will find that those actions that are morally evil are those that involve initiating the use of physical force on others. So again, just the sentence that murder is morally neutral is, in a very real sense, incorrect. It's also worth looking at the fact that, again, we're looking at the term murder, that it's this kind of baggage that we attach to it. There's a great deal of social conformity, so that you may think that something is intrinsically bad, but that kind of intrinsic value has been instilled in you from birth. So it's very difficult to know whether that is a proper intuition that something is bad, or whether it's an intuition based on the conformity that society has propagated. So it's very, very difficult to look at this in such black and white terms that Epydemic2020 has presented it, and I would be very wary of that. So what we have in Epydemic2020's murder case is taking another man's life against the other man's will, and in doing so make a conscious decision to do that in order for him to die. So I would say that this is in no way morally neutral, that there are consequences to that action which would be internal, that are not so obvious as 1 minus 1 equals 0. You're taking it out of context, so that the context of creating a supposedly morally neutral murder will have consequences to the other people that see this. It will see murder as acceptable in society, even though it might be misinterpreted as such. There are so many consequences that will come to this. You just literally can't take this out of the context of society. And using the word murder as well, it has its baggage. So perhaps killing someone would have been a better choice of word, because you are doing so in order to save someone else. So I think there's multiple flaws in his use of the morally neutral murder. Just one final point, and that's about Epydemics2020's final statement in the video, that asking why we are obligated to follow moral standards. And of course, that is a huge question begged there. And are we obligated? And what is obligation? Can you have duty in and of itself? Because I would argue, as many philosophers do, that an ought statement, like you should do something, we are obligated to do something, as Epydemic2020 said, is only an apodesis, which means it's a then clause after a prostasis, the if clause. So I ought to change the oil in my car makes no sense on its own unless it follows if I want my car to run well. However, as with morality, it's not necessarily normative. If you change the prostasis to if you are a scientist investigating the effect of oil loss on engines, then the apodesis is false. Oughts are conditional. They depend entirely on the goal. But unfortunately, most times we just forget the if clause. It's kind of, we say it without the if clause, but it's embedded there, sort of invisibly. Finding an ought that exists externally of you for the reasons of an action is called externalism, and I adhere to internalism, which states that oughts only make sense within the confines of internal reasoning. There's a guy called Bernard Williams that talks a lot about this. So whenever you ask anyone, including Christians, why they do something, it always reduces to happiness. The consequence of Christians' actions will get them to heaven. Why do they want to go to heaven? To be eternally happy. You cannot simply have an ought independent of a goal. You can't say you ought to be good for the sake of being good. I contend that you can't. I say that you cannot say that. You cannot be good for the sake of being good. It just seems to make no sense. Even though there is a prostasis here, it is tautologous. So that means it's kind of answering itself. If I want to be good so that I can be good, if I'm good, then I will be good. What if I wanted to go to hell? Then the ought makes no sense. So thus you should be moral if you want to have an enduringly happy life. It seems to make perfect sense, which is very much a consequentialist ethic. Guy that looks into this, Richard Carrier, in his Sense and Goodness Without God, a defense of metaphysical naturalism, goes through this whole argument exceptionally well. Really, really well written book, worth a read. But I would say that there are issues with Epydemic2020's notions of a morally neutral murder, and I would say that, just to tip it off at the end, that it is possibly dubious that we are obligated to follow moral standards unless you have, if we want to do X, Y, and Z, then we're obligated to. And it's setting out that goal that gives you the consequence, that gives you the morality for those actions. So, just a few thoughts. Cheers. A final conclusion or thing to say about Epydemic2020's videos, that he didn't really address any points that I made in my video. In fact, none at all. And this may be because it wasn't essentially a response to my video. It's just one of his videos he had done that he tagged on as a response to mine. So, but I would say that it would be nice if he addressed the key points in my video, because I think it's a hugely powerful argument about morality. And as I say, even if objective morality exists, it's fairly irrelevant when it's put in context, and it's all about the context, and you can see that in the Bible. Cheers.